Thanks for participating in iPollinate. I'm Alex Harmon-Threet. I'm a professor at the Department of Entomology at the University of Illinois and one of the co-creators of iPollinate. Today I'm going to try and walk you through some of the key components of collecting data at your own research garden. We're here at my house, and this is my research garden. It's still late May, so the garden is not looking as beautiful as it should be by the time we're ready to collect data, but we wanted to get this out to you as soon as possible. So when I was choosing my flowers, I wanted to choose plants that were different than the ones that I recorded data on last year, and ones that I found visibly appealing. I'd never had these cleums before. I was pretty excited to find these in the at the store. And lantanas I haven't used before, so I was pretty excited to bring those back, in. Alyssums I have used before, but those usually are pretty attractive, so I thought I'd give myself a little bit of an upper hand. This is my little garden. I'm not one much for using very many chemicals or mulch or anything like that in my yard, so this is a little bit weedy, and that's totally okay.
Thank you for taking the time to observe pollinators in your research garden. You will be observing only on the annual plants and not on the milkweed. These plants were chosen because they are either very commonly purchased by gardeners or commonly recommended for pollinators, but little data exists on their performance across many conditions. Our goal is for you to record data on each plant species multiple times during each week. So with 6 plant species, we hope you will record at least 3 observations in each one. Much of the project should be able to be completed in about an hour a week. Before beginning, please review how to tell a bee from a fly or a wasp. All 3 of these can look very similar, but it is important to try to distinguish them. If you are unsure, you can enter the visit as other. Start by checking the weather, date, and time, and recording those on your datasheet. You may also create your own datasheet on a piece of blank or notebook paper to allow you to record more observations. When you are ready to begin collecting data, find a comfortable seat and identify 2 plants that you can observe from this location. The 2 plants should be of the same variety. Set your timer for 3 minutes and watch for any insects that visit the flowers of the plants. Please do not count things on the leaves. If you see something move to multiple flowers on either of your 2 plants, please only count it once. However, if it moves away from your 2 plants and comes back, you may count it again. These are considered independent visits. Quite often, you will not see anything visit your plants during the few minutes you are there, and that's okay. This zero information is incredibly important to make sure we make good recommendations for which plants are most attractive to pollinators. If you have a large, beautiful bee-friendly yard, you may be even more likely to see few things visit your research garden. Remember to also take time to look carefully at your milkweed plants and check for the various instars if you are participating in that portion of the project. Thank you again for your time, and we hope you enjoy participating in iPollinate. For more information, please visit our webpage, ipollinate.illinois. Research has shown that the broader habitat context surrounding a garden matters to how attractive it is to pollinators. For example, a bee may be more likely to visit a plant if there is nothing else around. Because of this, it is normal for you to record how your garden is doing, what is happening in your yard, and what is happening around your yard in your neighborhood. Floral surveys should be conducted within a week of collecting data on visitors to your research garden. If you are sampling during the 3rd week of the month, you will only have to do this once. If you are sampling multiple times a month, you may need to repeat it more than once a month. To start your yard assessment, first look at your research garden and evaluate its health on a scale of 1 to 5. Dr. Harmon-Threet's were establishing well due to the early rains, but some had been munched on, so she gave it a 4. Please quickly document how far your research garden or planters are from other plants in your yard. Ideally, it is XX feet away from other plants, but if it had to be closer, we understand. Next, start walking around your yard and count how many flower varieties are blooming in the entire yard. If you have 2 types that are the same species but different colors, please count them separately, and if you have the same plant in multiple locations, please be careful to only count it once. It may be useful to write them down as you go. Make sure to take your time. This garden had 24 species blooming during this demonstration. Now take a quick assessment of the floral abundance within 100 yards of your property. Dr. Harmon-Threet lives on the corner, so you can easily see in all 4 directions and the front yards of most of her neighbors. While some yards have a few flower types, most yards do not have large diverse gardens, and so she selected low. Last, we would like you to share what plants in your yard outside of your research garden are most attractive to pollinators. This information provides some additional valuable information about other attractive varieties that we may be able to recommend in the future. Please do these surveys between 7 a.m. and 10 a.m. If you have decided on the 5 or fewer attractive plants in your yard, please approximate the number of flowers. Note that if the same flower variety is in multiple places, count all of the blossoms together. To count these quickly and easily, we use the XXX method, which means you count dense clumps of flowers in an inflorescence, spike, head, or umbel as one flower. This number doesn't have to be super precise and round to the nearest number on the sheet. Thank you so much for watching, and please visit us at ipollinate.illinois.edu with questions.
Hey everyone, it is peony season, the best darn time of the year. I love this time of year in the spring. I'm here to talk today about the best time to cut peonies for cut flower use. So whether you're a gardener and you just want to bring them in to enjoy in your kitchen, or you're a producer and you're wanting to sell them at the farmer's market, whatever it might be, the stage that we cut peonies in is called the marshmallow stage. And what that means is that when I give this peony head a little bit of a squish, it should have some give to it. It should have some nice color on it, and it should have a little bit of squish. If you looked at, let's say, this one here, you can see if I squeeze that, it's pretty darn rock hard still, not quite ready to pick. I want to cut at this marshmallow stage so that I don't lose very much vase life on the plant. I could leave this on here longer, of course, and enjoy it in the garden, but for the optimum vase life, this is where I'm going to cut that stem. I'm going to cut it as long as I need it, making sure to leave some foliage on the plant. I'm going to strip all of the foliage on the stem and then put that in a vase to enjoy. Now, since I grow cut flowers for weddings, for farmers market I also want to be able to store these for a period of time, which is also why I want to make sure that I'm not harvesting too late. What I would do is cut those stems, remove the foliage, wrap them in newspaper, and I can put them in my flower cooler or in a fridge as long as it doesn't have other ethylene sources in there. And I can store them from several weeks up to a month or two. And then when I'm ready to use them, I can take them out of the cooler, give them a fresh cut, put them in water, and they will open almost immediately. So just be sure you're not harvesting too late and wasting too much of that vase life while they're out in the garden. And then ants, of course, are something that we get asked a lot about on peonies. They don't do any damage to the peony. They're just there for that sugary kind of nectar on the opening flower buds. So they don't hurt anything, not a problem. If I were to cut these and bring them in, what I would do is just cut them and dunk the flower heads in the sink, and those ants would just come right off. They're not required for the buds to open. They don't do anything like that, but they do help to keep other pests away from the peonies, so that's great. So don't worry about the ants, just dunk those flower heads in water if you have them when you bring them inside, and enjoy your blooms.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are the Horticulturists here to answer your gardening questions, and we have a awesome guest with us today and a great topic for today. So we're excited to be here. My name is Candace Hart. I'm the State Master Gardener Specialist for UVI Extension, and I'm based here in Central Illinois. And I love to talk about flowers. So some of the herbs we're going to talk about do flower, which is lovely. But I like to talk about flowers, which are annuals, perennials, cut flowers. Love to that. But luckily, I have some other great horticulturists with us today who like to chat about other. Introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Ryan Pancaw. I'm the horticulture educator in Champaign County, so I cover a swath of central Illinois. And, my favorite topics are anything woody plants, so trees and shrubs, all those kind of things. I'm a big home vegetable gardener, so I like to do that, and that has got me into herbs. It's kind of a spin-off of vegetable gardening. Also interested in kind of native plants, native insects, and that relationship. So from a pollinator standpoint, I love my herb garden for that too. But we also have another wonderful horticulturalist with us today. So Jamie, would you like to introduce yourself to folks?
Yes. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me today on this live. My name is Gemini Bhalsod, and I'm a horticulture educator, and I'm located in Cook County, Illinois. I'm really excited about today's topic because I love vegetable gardening, and herbs are just a great companion for your vegetable garden. And I also love cooking too. So this is the time of year that I'm really dreaming about all the food I'm going to cook with my lovely herbs. And so, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, we're so glad you're here with us today. Kelly couldn't join us, so we're glad to have Jamie on for sure to help us out today. So as you are hearing, our topic for the day is herbs. So that's what we're going to kind of focus on today. So if you have questions about herbs of any kind in your garden, in containers, whatever it might be, feel free to start adding those to the comments. Or if you have any other gardening question today, we're happy to address that as well. But we're going to kind of kick it off by talking a little bit about herbs. So I think we were going to start with you guys kind of sharing a little bit about what we do at home in terms of herb gardening. So Ryan, you want to kick us off maybe with kind of what you do at home for herb gardening?
Sure. Yeah. So it's probably been recent years here where I've really gotten kind of into herb gardening. And, I probably focus a lot on the perennial herbs. And, it kind of started with a little tiny herb garden right outside our kitchen back door. So in the ground, and that's kind of slowly been built upon over the years. And so that's kind of my main thing is that little, herb garden right outside the kitchen door that I can run out and just grab a handful of stuff. And I'm just putting it directly into food during the growing season is usually what I'm doing. But I'd say we grow a good amount of basil too. We like to make pesto, and it stores pretty well. We'll freeze pesto. So that's one of those fairly productive things that we save for later in the year that I love, love that fresh taste of pesto in the middle of winter time. That's kind of our, how I herb garden is that way. We do a few in containers, but not many, just a couple that, we try and overwinter that way that aren't cold hardy. But so.
Okay, cool. How about you, Jamie? What do you like to grow?
Yeah, so I also started similarly, just like a little herb garden on my windowsill with some of my favorite things that I can't get enough of throughout the season. So basil being like one of my favorite herbs of all time. And I love mixing the purple basil in there too. So I really started out just growing herbs just on my windowsill and have since then expanded into my community garden. So I've been able to plant a few perennial herbs around the garden that will stay, that everybody can harvest from. Lemon balm, for example, is one of them. And then I've just started really growing more herbs in containers, both indoors and around my community garden. So it's really helpful for me to grow them in containers because they don't take up too much space from my vegetables, right? These perennial herbs can spread. And so I want to keep them as contained as possible. And then the herbs that I'm growing indoors are tropical herbs, and they don't overwinter or really grow that well outside except for a short period of time in Illinois. So I've been able to grow some culturally relevant herbs that I use in my cooking that I grew up with that has been a really fun exploration, both of, how to grow these plants, but also of like exploring this different world of herb growing that is not that common in Illinois.
That's really cool. Well, I'm going to share mine, and then I want to go back to that because I'm intrigued by some of those plants for sure. So I'm kind of the same way. I don't I do mostly containers as well when I do put herbs in, mostly because not so much for the vegetable garden, but most of my full sun space is reserved for growing flowers. So I don't have a ton of extra kind of great full sun locations where I can tuck those in. So like you, I tend to have a couple of different perennial ones that I have in either containers or kind of planters that go on the railings of my deck. And then, I'll tuck some annuals in, kind of mix in along with the perennials, and just be able to kind of cut and enjoy those throughout the season. Makes it really, really easy. That's one of my favorite things about herbs, is that they're so easy, really. And they're beautiful too. They're also aesthetically pleasing, most of them. So even if you don't get out there to harvest too much to use it as an herb, you still have a really great looking container most of the time, which is good. Yeah. Okay, well, go ahead and add those questions to the comments. If you have questions about herbs or any other gardening topics, we will definitely hit on those today. But I want to go back to, you were talking about kind of some unique tropical herbs that you like to grow, Jamie. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so earlier last year, I started growing my first curry leaf plant. Okay. So this is also known as sweet neem, but it's a really big culinary herb in India and other parts of South Asia. And so I was able to get a cutting from my mom, who got it from my aunt, Nice. So we're able to have this cutting that I started to grow, and I was able to have my first successful overwintering of it. So I feel really proud of myself being able to grow it. And it's just so nice to be able to have it in my house, because then I can just, freeze some of the leaves throughout the season when it's growing really prolifically, but then I'm able to just harvest and cook with it. And so this is a warm season plant, right? It's zones 9 to 12, which is absolutely not in Illinois. Yeah. So, you can leave it out during the summer, but, obviously you have to bring it back indoors in the winter and slowly acclimate it. So this is a plant that, if you shock it too much or underwater or overwater, it really rains its leaves down. So you have to be really consistent as possible and as slow as possible when you're moving it both outdoors and indoors for the season. So you can find these plants in grocery stores sometimes, but it might need to be special ordered. And it's really, the leaves taste they are very earthy, but they also taste citrusy at some point. It's kind of hard to describe, but they have a really strong smell. And so it's a really significant plant, both for my family and for, other people. And it's just a really unique taste that I love being able to have just as fresh as possible. And so there's an article about curry leaf that we can share with you all.
Yeah, we've got it in the comments, so definitely check that out, everybody. Do you use it fresh typically when you cook then, or do you dry it first, or both?
Yeah, it can be typically used just fresh, and then it's fried up and used in just as a base. Gotcha. So that's one of my favorite culinary herbs that I've really gotten into in 2020, nice. And it just is making everything just taste a lot better. And then I have been growing tulsi, which is a type of basil. Yeah. It's got a really mild scent, mild flavor, but it's a really good tea plant. So it's a basil plant, so it's an annual herb. It just reseeds itself in the pot, which is really nice. You don't really have to keep buying seeds every year, but I put it outside again in the spring and summer, and it just reseeds itself, and it's mostly a tea plant. So it's not as strong as the basil that you might be used to cooking with. It's very light and is great added to teas.
Very cool. Yeah, I know there's a flower farm near me that tends to grow that every year. And I think they sell it as a tea crop. So that's interesting. Very cool. Okay, awesome. Well, I don't see any questions yet. So let's keep chatting through that. Any tips for success for growing something like that indoors? We get asked a lot about what herbs can I grow indoors. In particular, I know I've gotten a lot of questions about rosemary, overwintering rosemary indoors. So any tips for kind of growing herbs inside, whether it's the winter or any time of year?
Yeah, maybe I'll let Ryan take us through his rosemary.
Yeah, I forget. Yeah, you have a great one doing.
Yeah, sure. I brought a little rosemary today that is was successfully overwintered, and I'd say my success rate with that is probably less than 50% of the time does it work. And I really got interested in this because a neighbor of ours, when we lived in Southern Illinois, she always had the most awesome rosemary plants and just overwintered them, and it was super easy, it seemed. And we started to try it, and it's like, gosh, that didn't work. This thing dried up and died in the window over the winter.
Yeah.
Well, as you look into it more, it definitely is a plant that is, kind of specific to that Mediterranean climate where, it's going to get dry and still stay warm over the winter, but not super cold. It's not going to be freezing. And so what we figured out is our neighbor's back porch was perfect for that. She had a spot where it wasn't totally insulated, but it wasn't totally uninsulated. And it just kept enough heat where like she wouldn't water the rosemary much. She'd let it sit in that perfect spot, and she just had phenomenal ones. So we've tried to kind of mimic that in our house. That's all we have. And so that's why for me, it's been kind of hit or miss, and this one was a cutting from an overwintered plant that, the other parts of the plant didn't look so great. And this thing we nursed along over the last several months to get it to this point. And now it's sitting outside and starting to really grow. So,
yeah.
So that's my, I don't know how you mimic that in a home, that kind of cool porch, but really sunny, bright and sunny. Definitely needs to have lots of sun. And so that's kind of my experience with overwintering rosemary, but it's super fun to have this, this plant that you've kept going, and you just barely touch it and it releases that scent. I love to walk by them and just kind of take a whiff. Or when there's, as there's, at least for the first few months when they sit in our kitchen and they're still okay in the wintertime, they still kind of smell, have a scent, but yeah, so it's not the easiest to do, but if you find that just sweet spot of your house or your porch or your garage or wherever that might be, they can do really well overwintering. So
cool. Yeah, I haven't found that sweet spot yet either. I think it's everywhere, every place I've put in, I think it's either been too warm or it's been too not humid enough. It's been too dry. That seems to be my biggest issues. I need a nice humid location to keep it. And I don't have it yet.
Yeah. So, worst case scenario, you can just buy another one.
Right.
Gets going. And I guess one thing I've thought is super cool in recent years, I've started to notice, and maybe it's been around more often than just recently, but so many grocery stores have a little section of potted herbs that you can just buy almost year round. I found them in the middle of winter in a local grocery store. So that's kind of neat. You've always got those plants there and available, and probably lend themselves really well to indoor growing over the wintertime with lights and things. So.
Cool. Yeah. And then obviously I think the other big tip for indoors is making sure you have the right light levels. So Jamie, you mentioned earlier kind of a windowsill garden. So if you've got that good kind of kitchen window, what would you say? Do you probably need a southern or a western facing window probably be the most successful?
Yeah, exactly. So some herbs are more adapted to kind of a part shade environment. I can think of chives right now. Those will do pretty well in a part shade, but most herbs will need 6 to 8 hours. So they do need full sun. And so I have my herbs in both a south and a western facing window. And, in the summer, you do have to water them pretty often. That south facing sunny window gets super hot and super hot and super sunny. But as long as you're keeping up with the watering and either have a big enough pot, all my plants that I've put there have done pretty well. With overwintering, you do need to be careful about having it be in a not drafty window. So I think that's been my biggest issue with overwintering herbs indoors. It's the sun exposure is good. It's a little dry, but it's just too drafty and too cold. And so even moving those where they might not be getting direct sunlight, but they're still getting a few hours away from the window, indirect sunlight, I've had a little bit of success there. Herbs that are hardy are also really easy to overwinter outdoors. So I mentioned that most of the herbs that I grow, because I have a pretty small space outdoors, is in containers. What I'll do in the winter after I've harvested my whole raised bed is I'll actually just dig a little hole and I'll take the pot and I'll put it in the raised bed. And so my oregano, thyme, chives are a little bit hardier, but all of those that are in pots, I'll just actually dig them in to my raised bed soil to keep the roots a little bit more insulated. So those roots in containers are just more exposed, right? They don't have all that soil and air cushioning it and keeping the temperature nice and consistent. And so I found really just digging them in for the winter has helped a lot over the last couple of years. So I think that is my biggest tip for overwintering outdoors if you're growing in containers.
Nice. Yeah, that's
because that exposed pot, it can sit there and almost turn into an ice cube. In the middle of wintertime, where if you just get a little insulation around it, I'm sure it keeps that from freezing solid and a little warmth there.
Yeah,
that's a really neat way to do it.
Nice. I think you had some thyme going, right? Is that what you did with that one container that you had?
Yes, exactly. Thanks for remembering. So this is my thyme that I overwintered just in a plastic container. You can see there's roots growing out the bottom. So, it was growing outside, really happy. And it's just come back in full swing. So last year when I did my last harvest, I kind of, trimmed it back a little bit, tried to contain it, but I just put it right in my raised bed and just brought it for us today to show you. So it'll creep around. This is this is English thyme. So it definitely creeps into some of my other pots, but that's not an issue throughout the season. I have been picking out little thyme plants in other parts of my garden, because when this does flower, it's pretty great for pollinators.
Yeah.
So long-lasting flowers.
Cool. Awesome. And Rich commented, my thyme overwinters in my garden just fine. Yeah, it's definitely a great perennial. It's just when it's in that container that you have to kind of worry about that root zone a little bit. So that burial technique can help with that. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, mine they're kind of bigger railing planters. So I don't bury mine, but I do try to kind of tuck them in kind of underneath the deck, kind of next to the house, like in a little bit more of a protected spot so that hopefully they have a little bit more insulation than just being out in the open. And that seems to help.
Yeah, I've also seen some people will save their leaves and, kind of put their leaves over. This works for other containers as well, right? Not just herbs, but putting those leaves around and then maybe throwing some chicken wire or something that you might have left over to keep that stuff down will also really help insulate your containers.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so just kind of pack it with leaves as an insulating layer. I've done a similar thing with mulch, and what I'm thinking of though is like woody plants that I bought before I had a place for. It gets to be winter time, and it's like, oh no, we never planted this. I've been watering it all summer, and so just whatever material it is, you can kind of get packed around that pot that just insulates a little bit, whether it's mulch leaves. Lots of stuff would work. Straw. It just depends on what you have, but just giving it that little bit of an edge. But there's just tons of herbs though that are hardy and grows perennials here, and that's kind of what I've focused on in my outdoor space where we grow herbs. And I'd say probably the biggest tip I could give people on that is like it is with so many plants, just a well-drained soil. I mean, I haven't found that they're particularly picky with soil fertility necessarily, but like that soil drainage, if you got a poorly drained spot, there's not many herbs that are going to do too well there. So it's kind of the biggest lesson I've learned.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. And I think I can think of one in particular we get asked a lot about is lavender. And lavender, kind of like rosemary, is one of those like Mediterranean plants that is used to a very well-drained, like rocky soil, which we, of course, in Illinois do not have. So a lot of times we can struggle with having lavender as a perennial unless we do a little bit of soil amending to kind of get it better drained. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say thyme is one of those too that kind of deals with almost like a nutrient poor, rocky, really well drained soil. And it's not culinary time that I just did this with, but I just recently did a flagstone area where I put in creeping thyme plugs.
Nice.
That will hopefully spread, and tried a couple different varieties I could find locally. But, in that case, I was really going for super well-drained soil. It's raised, everything is raised up under a bed of, sand is under those flagstones. And then even my soil mix was pretty sandy, well-drained. I mean, I'm wanting like this, it kind of faces south. So this dry, harsh environment that you'd never think of anything but a weed growing in. And, it's just got planted here this spring. So I'm not seeing much new growth, but hopefully it takes off and spreads in all the cracks of those flagstones over the years. And, it's really neat because supposedly, I've never had any at my house, but as you walk across it, you'll get that scent. It kind of stimulates the scent of the thyme. And so that's been kind of a fun little project the last, month or so. I've kind of, piddled with it. It's just a little small spot where you're entering a walkway is all it is. It's not very big,
Cool.
So,
you have to keep us updated how it fills in.
Maybe some midsummer pics of what we have once it's kind of flowering. So all those they stay really short and they'll flower and attract pollinators and look cool, look pretty.
Yeah. Love it. Okay, we've gotten a couple questions now, I think. Let's see. Michelle asked, I have cilantro and basil started from seed, growing in terracotta pots on the windowsill with teeny tiny gnats flying around. So our resident insect person, Kelly, isn't with us today. But my assumption is that it's probably fungus gnats, which is a very common, any kind of house plant, indoor plant is very common. And the easiest way to control that, Michelle, would be to let your soil dry out for a period of time. If you're keeping it kind of consistently moist, that's a great environment for those fungus gnats to reproduce and grow. So honestly, I wouldn't do anything to control it except for just letting the soil dry down and they will go away. Would you guys agree? Any other tips on that?
Yeah, I think maybe you could also try, if you had space, putting it outside and exposing it to some temperature change, some quicker drying and things. I think some of that is I don't know if I want to say stagnant indoor environment, but just the static indoor environment that doesn't change much and you can water it a lot, where outside it's going to get sun and wind and dry out and other things. So that might kind of help too. But it sounds a lot like fungus gnats. I mean, I think all of us that have had houseplants have had those before.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, that's also what I was going to say as well. If you don't want to take them outdoors, even just opening the window, kind of increasing that air circulation will likely help a lot. That's good. I mean, that's a great tip for all herbs and growing herbs. They're relatively pest-free, don't need much fertilizer and soil amendments, but air circulation is going to be the best way to make sure you have good quality herbs to either store or use throughout the season. So I think that's my biggest tip with growing herbs, either indoors or outdoors, trying to have air circulation if possible.
That's a good tip, yeah.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes your harvesting helps with air circulation too. I always think that, like, okay, I'm opening things up a little bit on my time here as I'm taking all this out. But
yeah, definitely. Cool. Okay, we'll keep those questions coming, guys. We've got one over here on YouTube. Susan commented, I definitely would like to hear about Gemini's herbs from other regions. So are you growing anything else, Gemini, from other regions?
Yeah, those are the two that I mentioned. So curry leaf and the tulsi, or also called holy basil, are the two newest ones that I've grown this in 2020. But I have a couple more culinary herbs on my list. I know cilantro is used in many different cultures and many different in many different cuisines, but that's another one that is a great culinary herb that I use a lot. And yeah, I think herbs are just a really great way to introduce culturally relevant foods and flavors into different garden environments. So those three are the top ones that I personally love growing, but I'm not sure if Candace and Ryan, if you guys are growing things that might be more uncommon. I think we hear a lot about the rosemary, thyme, even some different teas are really great to grow that might not be as common.
Yeah, I've never actually grown it, but I've looked into growing tea a little bit because I brew kombucha, which takes, really pure types of tea. So if you go buy I'm always buying organic tea for that. If you have any type of impurity in there, it can kill your yeast and bacteria colony that do the fermentation for kombucha. Okay. So I've thought about, because I've killed my batch before by brewing tea that had something in it. It's just hard to tell when you're buying it. So that's something I'm super interested in. And I thought I might do that as kind of a house plant. I sit outside for a lot of the year and try and bring in is what my goal was, but haven't ever launched into that. It's on the list of a gazillion different plant projects, of course. But, talking about cilantro, though, maybe we've talked quite a bit about some of these perennial herbs. Maybe we should kind of talk about the annual herbs because there's a little bit to those, and I think probably the most difficult part of that management is just keeping them from flowering, because when they flower, you start to lose a lot of those qualities. And cilantro is kind of a cool one in that you get this other seasoning once we eat the leaves as fresh cilantro is how I usually do it. And then coriander is what it is when it goes to seed. So kind of cool. You get two different types out of the seed. But what have you guys done in the way of annuals?
Yeah, I've definitely done the cilantro, like you mentioned, and a lot of times I'll do a crop or two in the spring to kind of like extend it a little bit. And then usually I have intentions of like doing another round of it, but I a lot of times don't get to it. And like you mentioned before, basil is definitely one of my favorite annuals to mix in as well. Those are probably my top two ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like growing things like parsley or borage or even like dill. So they're not my favorite flavors, but a fresh dill on your salad in the summer is like great. I will grow a bunch of dill plants just for that experience a few times in the summer. But I mostly grow those because they're just really good for pollinators. So like parsley and dill and I think fennel as well are good larval host plants. So if I'm not eating it, some really great caterpillars are, which I feel pretty good about in my garden. And then borage has those really nice sort of light tasting flowers. I don't know how you both, if you use borage that much, but I will, let it grow for the pollinators, but then pick off the flowers and also put them, as an edible flower on things that I'm making.
Yeah, I love borage, and a lot of times I don't even get around to using it. I just love the look of the plant too, as an ornamental plant. So yeah, that's definitely a good one too.
Well, and one cool thing with like dill or cilantro, I've done it with both of these, is that you can kind of let it go to seed and reseed itself then if you just leave that area alone. So that's kind of a neat aspect of those. Or with cilantro, this goes way back to January of this year. We had a little hands-on activity in Master Gardener training where we planted. It was a super simple one, and we chose it because it was simple. It was hands-on. We could do it over Zoom because we weren't in person then. Where it's just as easy as taking a Ziploc bag, a gallon Ziploc bag, adding some soil to it, and seeding cilantro into that. And I'll bet I got maybe 3 or 4 harvests out of that little Ziploc bag that sat there in my south-facing window from January through. It's just been the last month or so. It seemed like it kind of fizzled out, or, like after a while, probably the nutrients in that potting soil get used up a little bit, or just the potting soil gets a little stale. So as opposed to really, now that I'm getting into full swing, outdoor gardening, I kind of just tossed it. But it was really more productive than I thought it would be when I planted it. And just simply sitting there in a Ziploc bag. And that's one that is kind of an easy kid activity too, even where it doesn't take a lot of supplies and is just super easy and fun. And you get a result out of it that's something you can eat.
Exactly. And cilantros are pretty big seeds too, so they're pretty easy to plant, which is cool. Cool. Okay, so that brings us to a good question and another comment. Rich also commented his favorite prolific volunteer herbs in his garden are dill and lime basil. And so like you said, I think that's one of my favorite things too about the annual, especially if you have a designated vegetable garden or an herb garden, is just let them go to seed and enjoy what comes up. Some gardeners might not like that. It might kind of annoy them with all these seedlings coming up, but it's kind of nice and you don't have to plant it again the next year, which is great. And then Mary asked, when it gets hot outside, my cilantro does not grow, and we can touch on that. We did a little bit. Should I try to grow it inside? So like you kind of just mentioned, Ryan, cilantro would be great as a container plant inside, right?
Yeah, it works really well. Something we haven't got into is the situation indoors under grow lights too. If you don't have the light, there's some really neat little, if you really want to buy it all as a package, little herb garden kits that can sit on your kitchen countertop. And so I've seen some really cool ones that those folks have had going. My kitchen windows are south facing, and I've got a countertop that, like Jamie kind of talked about earlier, not exactly direct sun, but gets really bright light and things kind of do well there. So that's where I've kind of had them indoors. That's kind of where that cilantro was close to that window, not really in total direct sun. So yeah, but why it's, it shuts off in the summertime when it gets really hot, and it starts to go to seed, and that's just natural process for that plant. So if you wanted to keep it going, I guess the best way to maybe do that is to start a fresh seeding indoors a little point before that, really hot part of the summer, and get some fresh plants coming up. I think outdoors there's probably just a little too much heat and intense sun and things that you're just never going to kind of get it going in midsummer, where what I would do is then wait till later in, early fall or the late season, you could seed it directly outside is another way. But gosh, cilantro just is one of those things I almost can't get enough of. I mean, I'm buying it at the store a lot as fresh cuttings, and, I could probably plant a whole garden bed of the stuff and would use it in things. It's just one of those tastes I really like. And, my kids tolerating things, and, how kids are picky. So it's kind of a family favorite. So I never have been able to grow enough that I didn't buy any at the store, but kind of transitioning to maybe indoor growth during that middle part of the hot part of summer would be a great way to kind of keep your production up too. So.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, awesome. We'll keep those awesome questions coming. We've got another one over here on YouTube from Susan. Other than mint, what are some of the spreaders that a garden should take more steps to control? So we haven't really touched on that yet. You mentioned your thyme kind of creeps around a little bit, but mint is another one of those perennial herbs that if you just planted it and let it go, it's gonna go. So are there any other any tips for that, and then any others that you think are ones that are maybe to kind of keep control of in the garden a little bit? Jamie or Ryan, whoever wants to touch on.
Well, it doesn't spread as fast as mint, but chives over time will also spread out in your garden.
That's true.
So that's more of like a clump former, but it will get, it will spread out if you don't have it contained. So if you have a small space, that might be something that over time will be something that would be of concern, but it does stay pretty well controlled if you have other stuff around it. So definitely not as difficult at all to control as thyme, but that's just the first one that came to my mind that spreads as well.
Yeah. Mint is just one of those, garden bad guys that people talk about. That's, I had a house that had a whole section just taken over by mint that, we pulled until the point we moved. So it's definitely super aggressive. I don't think there's really anything in the culinary herb category that compares quite to mint.
Yeah.
But, and I think Jamie has a good point that if you can kind of get some plant pressure around, or some plants around some of these herbs that spread, they don't tend to do it as much. Where in my case, I don't feel like sage is a real aggressive spreader a lot of times, but where we started our little herb garden was on the edge of kind of a pollinator garden. It was just a weird spot by a walkway. We hadn't planted stuff in, so my sage got going with like no pressure around it. I think it was one of the first ones we planted, and so it's kind of become this spreading clump of stuff. But now as plants have kind of filled in around it and that all of that area, the pollinator garden and everything was kind of new. And as that's kind of filled in and tightened up, it's kind of contained the sage a little better. But probably I could do a little better of a job of harvesting that where, I'm using it kind of fresh as an Italian seasoning kind of mix. And I don't know if that's really a correct, I'm considering that like a mimic of Italian seasoning. And then from time to time, I have like a homemade sausage recipe that I use it for when we have a lot of sausage to do and we have an animal that, we from time to time have a farmstead hog that we'll raise. So it's like my sage is there for like when I need that big boost, I decimate the patch, but the rest of the time it's like I'm probably not harvesting enough. So that's maybe one thing to think about is, I've got enough that, it's great when I'm making, 30 pounds of sausage, but the rest of the time I don't need all that sage there. So I'm starting to kind of like chop it out and let other things fill in. So I think if you can just have a tightly packed, some plant competition going on there, most of these herbs kind of work well together. It's that mint is just a whole nother animal, I feel like.
Yeah. Leave that in the container away from anything else. And Rich commented too, oregano might be another one that would be a little spreading too in the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Same thing in my place.
Yeah, I've had lemon balm spread a lot, but it was exactly like you were saying, Ryan. I was like, well, I really should put something around it and maybe not let it do whatever it wants to do. But that one definitely spread all over my garden until I kind of contained it a little bit.
And that's a good point too. I feel like, Ryan, too, about harvesting it. Like if you are harvesting it on a regular basis, that's also going to help you kind of control things and keep them in line too.
Yeah, it doesn't work to like every 2 years harvest. That just isn't enough. So
yeah. Right.
For sure.
Cool. Okay, let's see. We've got another one here. Jonathan asked, any kind of wild herbs that I might expect to find in my yard or native to this area? Any native wild herbs?
Well, I mean, there's wild onion, although it's not super abundant. It is an edible top to that plant. It's just not very productive. It's a little tiny dinky top, but it gives an oniony flavor. I guess one thing that comes to mind for me, and it's not a native plant at all, it's an invasive species, but garlic mustard is an invasive that you'll see, you really can't miss it this time of year, that has an edible leaf and a garlicky flavor. And it's just kind of like to me, well, and actually to go back a step, May is Invasive Species Month. So if you've paid attention to the all the extension stuff that's going out over social media and other places, we're talking a lot about invasive species this month. So that's kind of why it's on my mind. And garlic mustard comes up. Was just pulling some with my kids last weekend in our little woods. We still have a problem with that. So that's one that is unfortunately abundant in a lot of places in Illinois that is harvestable. But I'm trying to think of other, native herbs that are really usable. And I'm drawing a blank.
I have seen and harvested sorrel before. So sorrel is an oxalis species, I think. And so it kind of looks like a clover, but it's not a clover, similar style leaves. But that is, I think commonly people think of it as a weed. But that has a really lemony flavor. And so I wouldn't call it like a native herb, but I would call it an edible weed, I guess.
Yeah.
I would call sorrel that. And so I think that's the only one really that I can think of. It's got a really sharp lemony flavor. So on top of things or mixed in to like a green mix is how I've used that before, but only from areas in my garden that I'm, not from like your lawn, especially if a lawn company comes in and is spraying or doing work or anything. You want to be careful about where you're harvesting the sorrel from, just for safety purposes. But if it's just growing in my vegetable garden, which I know what the inputs to my vegetable garden are, I will definitely harvest sorrel when it comes up, just as like a little lemony snack. But
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, though, of where you're harvesting these things out of nature. Really, really think about that, because it's hard to know what's happened at those locations.
Yeah, and make sure your ID is very accurate as well. Make sure you know for sure what you are harvesting if you're going to use it as an edible anything. Yeah.
Yeah, we've done some edible plants programs, and that's definitely a theme on those hikes. Is just, hey, this botanist we have here is an expert level botanist that is showing you this.
Yeah.
Be absolutely sure you're getting a truly edible plant. So there's a lot of words of caution with that. I guess another one that kind of comes to mind along those lines is fennel that you could forage for, and I don't know if you've ever smelled it or tasted it. It's kind of a black licoricey taste. So I'm not sure exactly what you would put that in. I guess the one place where I've seen it used that was really good was in home brewing of beer as a flavoring for a certain type of brown ale that I thought was just a really neat and interesting kind of licoricey taste that you could add. And that's one of those plants that when I see it in the fall time, you can just kind of grab it and take a big whiff and get that smell. And that's about the extent to which I've used it. But I know there's folks that do use that.
Yeah, I love the smell of it too, but I honestly say I've never used it in cooking before.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that don't like that licoricey kind of smell. I like that. I like that flavor and taste and everything.
Yeah, it'd be strong, I bet. If you, Awesome. Okay, well, keep those questions coming, whether they're about herbs or if you have any other gardening questions, we're happy to help you out today. So I think we are caught up on questions. We're good on YouTube as well. So we've kind of been talking all about growing herbs and using herbs, but I know what we haven't touched on too much is kind of storing them or utilizing them. Like a lot of times you can just head out and harvest them fresh and use them right away. But what if you have an abundance that you're not sure what to do with? Have you guys ever done any techniques for drying or storing, or any tips there for people?
Jamie, I'll let you handle this one. I've not gotten too far into the preserving. I'm more of a just fresh use and kind of let it go, and I don't utilize my stuff that well.
Sure.
Yeah, no problem. I definitely think drying or freezing herbs is a great way to keep, if you're not overwintering them indoors and harvesting throughout the winter, that's a great way to keep those flavors. And so some easy ways to do that, you just room drying your herbs, at the end of the season, cutting them down and drying them in a well-ventilated area, and then being able to strip the leaves off. So dried herbs that are either on the stem or full leaves store better and longer than if you were to crush it. So I recommend just like drying it and then storing it and then taking them off and crushing them when you're about to use them. So that's going to help preserve that flavor as good as possible. You can also use a dehydrator. I know a lot of people have that. And I've seen people use an oven or a microwave, but I haven't had much success with it because it has to be on super low heat, right, in your oven and for a very small amount of time in your microwave. So I would say dehydrator or even just air drying them are my most successful methods, along with storing them in the freezer. So I think you can cut them up and store them in the freezer. Things like chives and green onions store really well, just chopped up in a frozen bag that you're able to pull out. And then doing things like you had said, Ryan, like making the pesto and just having that ready in your freezer and storing them in oil. I don't know if either of you do that either.
Yeah, I've done that. The mix like basil with olive oil and put it in a ice cube tray. That way when you're sauteing something, you can just kind of throw the ice cube in there and it'll melt down and then you're good to go.
Yeah, that's how we do pesto. It's really easy. In ice cube trays, you crack them out into a freezer bag and then you can store that and just, we'll just take make pasta, throw the ice cubes in when the pasta's hot and just mix it all up. And you've got basil pasta, which is one of my kids' favorites. It's a great, quick and easy meal that's got that fresh taste of the garden in the middle of winter.
Yeah, easy peasy.
I do that a lot with cilantro as well. So I'll just chop it up, but you don't have to put that one in oil. I've had pretty good success with just freezing it in a bag and then being able to pull some of that out as a garnish or like mixed in at the end. Still gives you that good cilantro flavor.
I've never tried that with cilantro. I'll have to try that.
Yeah, that's great. I've never tried it with cilantro. I've tried kind of my own version of an Italian seasoning mix of just different leaves that are chopped up that I would freeze just in a bag, freezer bag. That's worked pretty well. But most of that I'm putting into like a pasta sauce or something that I'm just cooking the heck out of. So it doesn't matter if the leaves kind of lose some of their texture, in the freezing process, they still have the flavor. And that's worked pretty well and super simple. I mean, that just came from me making that mixture and chopping up a little too much of it. And I was like, oh, what am I going to do with this extra? I had too much for the recipe and I've just kind of thrown it in the freezer and forgot about it for a few months and pulled it out and it worked pretty well. So freezing is a great option.
Nice. Let's see. We had a comment here from Susan who was asking about the mint. She said for her extra sage, she cuts it back late in the season, ties the cut branches with twine, and then hangs them upside down to dry. That's definitely a easy way to dry sage. And then she says she uses them in the fireplace in the winter. I've never heard of that. So that's interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah.
What a unique way to use it.
I know. Yeah. I know I've seen a lot of people make kind of smudge sticks where you can wrap them with twine and stuff. So that's a cool idea. Yeah. Use them up. They definitely want to, if you're growing them, you definitely want to make use of them for sure. Let's see, we had a couple other comments here. Deb said fennel is delicious in salads, so we'll have to give that a try. And then someone also said they've been successful making drinks with things like lemon verbena, basil, stevia. So yeah, infusing them into, I've had some really good lemonades infused with herbs before. That's a great way to use it. Very good. Okay, awesome. Well, I think we are caught up on questions and we've got about 10 minutes left, everybody. So if you have any lingering questions about herbs or anything else, feel free to add them into the comments. Let's see. Go ahead. Yeah.
We've touched on this a little bit. Jamie, you got into it, just the pollinator relationship to herb gardens.
Yeah.
That's kind of what gave us inspiration to kind of plant. Not only was it by our back door, but again, next to an area we were trying to establish as a pollinator garden. So you've got, a lot of great benefit from just the floral resources it provides. But, Jamie talked about, it supports the larval form of some of these insects. So that can be an important support. But I think a really cool thing that I want to try at some point, and I just haven't gotten organized enough to get this set up, is including a section of herb garden in my regular vegetable garden. And the reason would be to attract those pollinators that would be attracted by the blooms and would also be predators of, some of our pest type insects. So, there's other benefits of, attracting this insect life that would use your herb garden. So I think that's kind of a cool way to add, some pollinator attracting areas that are also edible to your vegetable garden. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Jennifer Fishburne, who's another horticulture educator, did a program for the Four Seasons Gardening webinar series. I think it was in 2020, and it was called Small Space Gardens for Pollinators. And she had this whole section on herbs for pollinators. So some of the ones that I remember she mentioned in that episode, which I encourage you all to check out on our YouTube page, was letting things like dill and parsley, borage, I think I already mentioned, and like lavender, lemon balm, even thyme, just letting some of those flower because that is a great pollen and nectar source for a lot of pollinators. So that will definitely bring beneficial insects into your garden. So another resource I wanted to share, just because you were mentioning about, having pollinators come, but also kind of trapping or detracting the pests, right? We don't want the pests, but we want all the good bugs. A book that I recently got is called Plant Partners. So it's called Science-Based Companion Planting Strategies for the Vegetable Garden. So the reason I really like this book is because there's a lot of, the author really references a lot of research. And so one section is all about using plants for trap cropping. So this is a companion planting technique where it's not really deterring pests, right? Which is often a common misconception that like, if you were to plant this, and that's going to deter pests. And there's not a lot of research to back up that notion, but there's a lot of research to back up if you're intercropping and planting herbs among your vegetables, they can act as sort of traps. So the vegetables that you want to harvest the most of won't get as much damage. And so an example is, that's in this book, is planting catmint with potatoes. So though that catmint actually works to trap the Colorado potato beetle, so your potatoes aren't getting eaten by them. And something like this plant, you know, if you're just harvesting a little bit of the herbs here and there, I usually don't see a lot of damage to the point where I'm not able to harvest it. Another favorite is sage, dill, and hyssop are actually used for cabbage worms. So if you're interplanting that with your brassicas or maybe other cole crops, those herbs are good companion plants, so you have less damage for your cabbage. So I think those are two really good examples of like maybe alternative ways to think about using herbs in your landscape and in your vegetable garden. Obviously, we want to harvest and eat as much of that as possible, but if you're like me, where you're just planting as many of them as you can that will fit in, you know, we wouldn't be gardeners if we didn't have too many plants for our gardens, right? Then you're able to kind of use them in these creative ways. So another big one is tomatoes and basil. So if you're planting with basil around the tomatoes will kind of like shade out in the hottest part of the summer, the basil, so you don't have to pinch off the flowers as often. They grow a little bit slower, but what's great is that planting basil has actually been shown to limit the egg laying of hornworms. So I'm not sure if, you know, some of these things I've done in my garden and I've been able to see like, oh, okay, this crop is really making the pests like not attack the plant I want it to, that I want to harvest most of. But I really like this book because there's a lot of different examples of herbs used as trapping plants.
That is really cool. Yeah, I need to add that one to my library. I grabbed an older kind of one that's been around a lot longer. Carrots love tomatoes, and then also roses love garlic, which is more about flower kind of companions. But that one sounds really great because what's always kind of hard about this companion planting is there's not a lot of research around it. A lot of it's just kind of like anecdotal, like, oh, I planted these two together and it worked. It helped with this. So some of it's kind of trial and error, but yeah, I'm gonna have to check that one out. Yeah.
Well, I love that using like plants to solve your problems. Yeah,
right.
Carefully planned out combinations that help that.
Yeah, I never would have thought of catmint with potatoes. So that's cool. And you know, the same goes for flowers too. You know, we always hear about, oh, plant your marigolds around the edge of your vegetable garden, right? Which a lot of people say is for rabbits, which is that's a myth. That doesn't actually help you anything there. But again, that can serve as a great trap crop, especially like a yellow, bright colored flower is going to attract quite a few insects to that, as opposed to hopefully other things in your garden. So it still has some value, just maybe not the value that we've heard of over the years, essentially. Very cool. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful for folks. Okay, I think last call on questions. If you have anything else we can help you with, let us know. Is there anything else, guys, that we didn't cover that you think would be helpful for folks growing herbs? Anything else you can think of?
Well, there was a question earlier. If we have time, I'd be happy to address it.
Yeah.
More about those like culturally relevant or other
Yeah.
tropical crops that I've tried growing.
Yeah.
And I did forget to mention ginger and turmeric.
Yeah.
So these are tropical plants that are grown for their rhizomes, used a lot in cooking. And I've had like mixed success growing them.
Okay.
It's pretty hard to buy a ginger or a turmeric rhizome at a grocery store that it has a lot of growing points or growing nodes on the rhizome. So if you're going this route, I definitely suggest ordering from a nursery or trying to go to a specialty store to get them to order the actual plant starts for you. But these plants are tropical plants. They're, zones 9 to something that I don't even have experience with, right? Like they're definitely not Illinois, but you can grow those and I grow them. I've grown ginger successfully in a pot for 2 years. It died after 2 years, but I tried.
That's pretty good.
But it takes a lot of watering. So in the summer, leave it outside. You really have to water them pretty heavily, but throughout the season, you can actually harvest rhizomes throughout the season, just a little bit off the ends of the plant and, take out half of it at the end of the season. So you kind of cut it back, be able to harvest a little bit of that rhizome while you're bringing it indoors. So I haven't had success with turmeric, but I know that it grows. I know that you can buy it online. And I know that it grows similarly to ginger. So if you're able to get the right, I think it's more about getting really good, high quality growing stock and root stock so you can get started on that pretty well. But that's another one that I've experimented with that I wanted to mention.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. Another tropical I thought of too was bay leaf. I've grown that as a house plant in the past, and that's something that you can dry and use as an herb too. So there's definitely some out there you can experiment with. Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Well, I think we are caught up on questions. So Jamie, I want to thank you for joining us today. This was great. I hope we've kind of inspired some folks to get out there and either get some containers going with herbs or get some planted into the ground. There's a lot that you can try if you've never done it before. Just as a reminder, our next show will be June 3rd. So in our 2-week usual pattern, and we're going to be talking about pollinators and our iPollinate citizen science program. So if you're interested in pollinators, definitely join us for that. And as always, be sure to check out our Facebook group, the University of Illinois Extension Horticulture group, where you can ask questions and learn a lot of things in between the show as well. So thanks again, Jamie. Appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining us today. We will see you next time. Happy gardening.